The first month at Mitchell Automotive passed in a blur of learning and hard work. Sarah arrived every day after school, changed into her coveralls, and threw herself into whatever task she was assigned. She rotated through different departments, learning bodywork one week, electrical systems the next, transmission repair after that. The other apprentices were older, most of them in their early 20s and fresh out of technical programs, but they welcomed her without hesitation. Once they saw how serious she was about the work, her mentor was a woman named Patricia Chun, a master mechanic with 30 years of experience who specialized in diagnostic work. Patricia was known throughout Mitchell Automotive as someone who could find problems that electronic scanners missed. She had a reputation for being demanding, and several apprentices had washed out of her program over the years. But she saw something in Sarah that reminded her of herself at that age, a hunger to understand not just how to fix things, but why they worked the way they did. Patricia taught Sarah to think like a detective. She explained that modern cars were complex systems where one failing component could create symptoms in a completely different area. A rough idle might be caused by a vacuum leak, a failing sensor, contaminated fuel, worn spark plugs, or a dozen other issues. The key was learning to trace symptoms back to their root cause rather than just replacing parts until the problem went away. Sarah absorbed everything like a sponge. She took notes during her Saturday technical classes, studied manuals and diagrams late into the night, and practiced her skills whenever she had access to a vehicle. Her grades at school remained solid despite her packed schedule because she had learned to manage her time efficiently. Sleep became a luxury, but she did not mind. She was building something real, a future that belonged entirely to her. At home, Marcus watched his daughter's transformation with a mixture of pride and bittersweet recognition. She was surpassing him, moving into a world of computerized systems and advanced diagnostics that had not existed when he learned his trade. He still helped her with homework when she asked, still answered her technical questions. But increasingly she was teaching him things instead of the other way around. One evening, as they worked together on an old truck in their driveway, Marcus asked if she was happy. Sarah looked up from the carburetor she was rebuilding and smiled. She told him she had never been happier. She felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. Marcus nodded, satisfied, and returned to his work, but not everything was going smoothly. 4 months into her apprenticeship, Sarah encountered her first major setback. She was working on a customer's sedan that had been brought in for intermittent stalling. She had run through all the standard diagnostics, checked the fuel system, tested the ignition components, verified the sensor readings. Everything appeared normal, but the car continued to stall unpredictably. Patricia had been watching Sarah work on the problem for 2 days. On the third day, she called Sarah into her office and closed the door. She told Sarah that the customer was getting frustrated and had requested that a more experienced mechanic take over. Sarah felt her stomach drop. She had failed. She had not been able to solve the problem, and now she was being pulled off the job. Patricia must have seen the disappointment on Sarah's face because she held up a hand. She said that this was not a punishment or a reflection of Sarah's skills. Sometimes a fresh set of eyes was needed. Sometimes problems were genuinely difficult and required someone with more experience. The key was knowing when to ask for help rather than stubbornly pursuing a dead end. She then said something that Sarah would remember for the rest of her career. She explained that being a good mechanic was not about knowing everything or never making mistakes. It was about being honest about the limits of your knowledge, being willing to learn from others, and always putting the customer's needs first. Pride had no place in a repair bay. Only results mattered. Sarah thanked Patricia and returned to the shop floor feeling humbled but not defeated. She watched as one of the senior mechanics took over the sedan. Within an hour, he had identified the problem, a hairline crack in the intake manifold that only opened up when the engine reached a specific temperature. It was the kind of issue that could take days to find because it did not show up on any diagnostic scan. The mechanic explained his reasoning to Sarah, showing her the subtle clues he had noticed, and how he had isolated the problem through systematic elimination, That experience taught Sarah more than any success could have. She learned that there was always more to learn, that even experts encountered problems that stumped them, and that collaboration was a strength rather than a weakness. She became more willing to ask questions, to seek advice from the senior mechanics, to admit when she did not know something. Paradoxically, this made her better at her job because she stopped wasting time on unproductive approaches and learned to recognize patterns more quickly. Meanwhile, back at Riverside Auto Shop, Richard's business was struggling. The rumors Sarah had mentioned were true. Several longtime customers had left for Mitchell Automotive specifically because they wanted to support Sarah. Others had left because Richard's poor management decisions had resulted in sloppy work and missed deadlines. The mechanics who had worked there for years were updating their resumes. Recognizing that the shop was heading downward, Marcus had stayed out of loyalty to his colleagues and because he was only a few years from retirement, but the environment had become toxic. Richard blamed everyone except himself for the declining revenue. He cut corners on parts quality, pushed mechanics to work faster rather than better, and ignored customer complaints. Marcus found himself fixing other people's mistakes more often than doing his own work. One afternoon, Marcus's phone rang while he was elbow deep in an engine. It was James Mitchell. Marcus stepped outside to take the call, wondering why the owner of Mitchell Automotive would be calling him directly. James got straight to the point. He said he had heard about Marcus from Sarah and from several mechanics in the industry, who spoke highly of his skills and character. Mitchell Automotive was opening a new location across town and needed an experienced mechanic to help train the staff and maintain quality standards. Would Marcus be interested in the position? Marcus was stunned. He asked about the salary and nearly dropped the phone when James named a figure 20% higher than what he currently made. There were benefits too: health insurance, retirement contributions, paid vacation, things that Richard had been cutting back on for years. James said that Sarah had not asked him to make this offer, that he made hiring decisions based purely on merit, but he would be pleased to have both father and daughter working for his company. Marcus asked for 24 hours to think about it. That night, he discussed it with Linda and Sarah over dinner. Linda said the decision was his to make, but she pointed out that he had given Riverside Auto Shop 2 decades of his life, and what did he have to show for it? A boss who disrespected his daughter and a workplace that was falling apart. Sarah said she would be thrilled to work alongside him again, but only if it was what he truly wanted. The next morning, Marcus called James and accepted the position. Then he walked into Richard's office and gave his 2 weeks' notice. Richard was furious. He accused Marcus of betrayal, of conspiring with his daughter to undermine the shop. Marcus listened calmly until Richard ran out of steam, then explained that he was simply taking a better opportunity with a company that valued his work. He offered to stay the full 2 weeks to train his replacement and ensure a smooth transition. Richard waved him away and told him to leave immediately. Marcus was not surprised. He collected his personal tools, said goodbye to his colleagues, and walked out of Riverside Auto Shop for the last time. Several of the other mechanics contacted him that evening to say they were also looking for new jobs. Word spread quickly that Marcus had left for Mitchell Automotive. Within a month, 3 more experienced mechanics had followed him. Marcus's first day at Mitchell Automotive coincided with Sarah completing her 6th month as an apprentice. James Mitchell organized a small celebration in the break room, acknowledging this unusual situation where a father and daughter were both part of his team. He gave a short speech about how his company succeeded because it focused on skills and character, rather than arbitrary credentials or prejudices. He said that the automotive industry was changing, and businesses that failed to adapt would be left behind. Sarah looked around the room at the diverse group of mechanics, men and women of different ages and backgrounds, all united by their passion for their work and their commitment to excellence. This was what a professional shop should look like. This was the environment where real learning happened. Over the following months, Sarah's skills grew exponentially. She passed her first certification exam with the highest score in her class. She began handling more complex repairs independently, building a reputation among the regular customers as someone who could solve difficult problems. Patricia told James that Sarah was the most promising apprentice she had trained in over a decade. One Saturday, Sarah was working on a particularly challenging electrical issue when a familiar car pulled into. Marcus had worked at Riverside Auto Shop for nearly 20 years. His hands were permanently stained with engine grease, and his coveralls carried the smell of oil and metal that never quite washed out. He was known throughout the neighborhood as the man who could fix anything with wheels. People brought him cars that other mechanics had given up on, vehicles that sputtered and died, engines that made sounds no one could identify. Marcus would listen, nod, and somehow breathe life back into them. His daughter Sarah had grown up in that shop. While other children played with dolls and toy cars, she sat on a rolling stool next to her father, watching him work. She asked endless questions. Why does this part connect to that one? What happens when you turn this bolt? How do you know? Which wire goes where? Marcus always answered patiently, his weathered face breaking into a smile whenever she showed interest. By the time Sarah turned 16, she could diagnose problems just by listening to an engine run. She had learned to feel the vibrations through the steering wheel, to notice the subtle hesitation in acceleration, to spot the tiniest leak beneath a chassis. But she was still just Marcus's daughter to everyone at the shop. The mechanics patted her on the head and told her she was smart. But no one took her seriously. The shop had changed hands 3 months ago. The new owner was a man named Richard Thornton, who had made his money in real estate and decided that automotive repair would be a profitable venture. He wore expensive suits to the shop and expensive watches that caught the light. He knew about profit margins and customer retention, but he knew very little about cars. This made him defensive, especially around people who did know about cars. Richard noticed Sarah immediately. She was there almost every day after school, helping her father, organizing tools, even doing small repairs on her own. He did not like it. He told Marcus that the shop was no place for a teenage girl, that it was dangerous, that there were liability issues. Marcus explained that Sarah was careful, that she had been around cars her whole life, that she was actually quite skilled. Richard's jaw tightened. He did not like being contradicted. One Thursday afternoon, a customer brought in a vintage car that had been sitting in a garage for 15 years. It was a beautiful machine, cherry red with chrome accents, but it would not start. The owner had tried everything. He had replaced the battery, changed the spark plugs, cleaned the carburetor. Nothing worked. He was desperate. This car had belonged to his father, and he wanted to drive it one more time before he sold it. Richard saw an opportunity. He gathered all the mechanics in the shop, including Marcus and Sarah, who had just arrived after school. He stood in front of the vintage car with his arms crossed and announced that whoever could get this engine running would receive a $500 bonus. The mechanics exchanged glances. $500 was significant money. They began rolling up their sleeves, grabbing their toolboxes, already planning their approaches. Then Richard looked directly at Sarah. His eyes were cold and calculating. He said that she could try too, if she thought she was good enough. His tone made it clear he did not think she was. Some of the other mechanics chuckled nervously. Marcus stepped forward, his face tense, but Sarah put a hand on his arm. She met Richard's gaze without flinching and said she would take a look at it. Richard smiled, but it was not a friendly smile. He said he would give her 2 hours. If she could not fix it in that time, she would have to admit in front of everyone that she did not belong in a professional shop. Marcus started to object, but Sarah had already agreed. She walked over to the car, her heart pounding but her hands steady. The other mechanics went first. They took turns working on the engine, checking every system they could think of. They tested the fuel pump and inspected the fuel lines. They examined the ignition system and verified the timing. They checked for vacuum leaks and tested the compression. One by one, they tried to start the engine, and one by one, they failed. The car refused to come to life. After 90 minutes, most of them had given up. They stood around drinking coffee, discussing what could possibly be wrong. Some suggested the engine might be seized. Others thought there might be water in the fuel system. A few wondered if the wiring had deteriorated beyond repair. They looked at Sarah, who was sitting on the ground beside the car with a flashlight, peering underneath the chassis. They shook their heads. If they could not fix it, what chance did a 16-year-old girl have? Richard checked his watch repeatedly. He seemed pleased that Sarah was struggling. He made comments about how complex real automotive work was, how it required years of experience and training, how natural talent only went so far. Marcus stood in the corner, his fists clenched, watching his daughter work. He wanted to help her, but he knew she needed to do this herself. Sarah tuned out the voices and the pressure and the ticking clock. She thought about everything her father had taught her. She remembered him saying that when a problem seemed impossible, it was usually something simple that everyone had overlooked. She closed her eyes and mentally walked through every system in the car. Fuel, ignition, air, compression, timing. What was she missing? Then she remembered something. Her father had once worked on an old car that had a safety feature, a hidden switch that prevented the engine from starting unless it was in the correct position. It was designed to prevent theft, but over time people forgot these switches existed. They were often hidden in usual places, under the dashboard or near the steering column or even in the trunk. Sarah crawled back under the car with renewed focus. She traced every wire and every cable, looking for something that did not belong, something that interrupted the normal flow of electricity. The light was dim and her neck ached from the awkward angle, but she kept searching. Her fingers moved along the frame, feeling for anything unusual, and then she found it. Hidden behind the fuel tank, covered in years of dust and grime, was a small toggle switch. It was in the off position. Sarah's heart raced. This was it. This had to be it. She reached up with a screwdriver and carefully flipped the switch. She heard a faint click. She crawled out from under the car, her shirt covered in dirt, her hair falling out of its ponytail. She did not say anything to anyone. She simply walked to the driver's side, opened the door, and slid behind the wheel. Every eye in the shop was on her. Richard looked at his watch again and opened his mouth to say something, probably to announce that her time was up. Sarah turned the key in the ignition. For a moment, nothing happened. The silence in the shop was absolute. Then the engine coughed once, twice, and suddenly roared to life. The sound was deep and powerful, the sound of a machine that had been waiting 15 years to run again. The engine purred smoothly, all cylinders firing perfectly, the exhaust note clean and strong. The shop erupted. The mechanics whooped and clapped. The customer rushed forward with tears in his eyes, thanking Sarah over and over. Marcus's face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen. He walked over to his daughter and pulled her into a tight hug, whispering that he was proud of her. But Sarah was watching Richard. His face had gone through several expressions in quick succession: surprise, disbelief, anger, and finally a forced smile. He walked over slowly and everyone quieted down to hear what he would say. He looked at the running engine, then at Sarah, then back at the engine. He asked her what she had done. Sarah explained about the hidden kill switch. She described where it was located and why everyone had missed it. She pointed out that it was an old anti-theft device that had been common in cars from that era, but had been forgotten over time. Her explanation was clear, confident, and technically precise. There was no way to dispute that she had solved a problem that had stumped everyone else, including mechanics with decades of experience. Richard's jaw worked silently. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. Very slowly, he counted out 5 $100 bills and handed them to Sarah. His hand was shaking slightly. Whether from anger or embarrassment, she could not tell. He congratulated her in a flat voice that held no warmth whatsoever. Then he turned to Marcus. His expression had changed to something cold and calculating. He said that he needed to speak with Marcus privately in the office. Now, the celebration died down as everyone sensed the shift in atmosphere. Marcus exchanged a worried glance with Sarah, then followed Richard toward the small office at the back of the shop. Sarah watched them go, the money still clutched in her hand, suddenly feeling that her victory might have cost her father something she had not anticipated. The office door closed with a click that sounded too loud in the sudden silence. Sarah stood in the middle of the shop floor, still holding the money, while the other mechanics awkwardly returned to their work. They kept glancing at the office, trying to appear busy while clearly listening for raised voices. The vintage car continued to idle smoothly beside her, a reminder of what she had just accomplished. But the joy of the moment had evaporated through the small window in the office door. Sarah could see Richard's gestures growing more animated. Marcus stood very still, his arms crossed over his chest, his face unreadable. She knew that posture. It was the one he used when he was controlling his temper, when he was choosing his words carefully. Her stomach twisted with anxiety. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. The customer with the vintage car had left, driving away with a huge smile and a promise to recommend the shop to everyone he knew. The other mechanics had finished their current jobs and were starting new ones, but the energy in the shop remained tense. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen when that office door opened. When it finally did, Marcus emerged first. His face was carefully neutral, but Sarah knew him well enough to see the anger simmering beneath the surface. Richard followed, straightening his tie and smoothing his hair, his businessman mask firmly back in place. He clapped his hands together once. Drawing everyone's attention, Richard announced that he had been thinking about the shop's future and had decided to implement some new policies. Starting next week, only certified mechanics would be allowed to work on customer vehicles. Anyone without proper certification would be restricted to basic maintenance tasks like oil changes and tire rotations. He said this was about maintaining professional standards and ensuring customer confidence. The words seemed reasonable on the surface, but everyone in the shop understood what they really meant. Sarah had skill and knowledge, but she did not have certification. She was 16 years old. She could not get certified for at least 2 more years, and even then she would need to complete a formal training program and pass several exams. Richard had found a way to push her out without explicitly firing her, or admitting that her gender or age bothered him. Marcus's hands clenched into fists at his sides, but he said nothing. He had clearly already fought this battle in the office and lost. Richard was the owner. He could make whatever policies he wanted. Fighting him openly would only result in Marcus losing his job too, and they both knew it. Sarah felt something hard and cold settle in her chest. She had worked so hard. She had proven herself. She had solved a problem that no one else could solve. And it did not matter. She was still being pushed aside, still being told she did not belong. But she forced herself to nod, to act like she understood, to not give Richard the satisfaction of seeing her upset. That night at dinner, Sarah barely touched her food. Her mother, Linda, noticed immediately. She had heard about what happened at the shop because Marcus had called her from the car, his voice tight with frustration. Linda reached across the table and took Sarah's hand. She told her daughter that the world was not always fair, that sometimes people with small minds used their power in small ways. But that did not mean Sarah should give up. Marcus added that Richard might own the shop, but he could not take away what Sarah had learned. He said the knowledge in her head and the skill in her hands belonged to her, and someday she would work somewhere that valued those things. He promised that they would figure something out. Maybe she could help him with side jobs on weekends. Maybe they could find a shop with a better owner. Sarah appreciated their words, but she also saw the worry in their eyes. Her father had worked at Riverside Auto Shop for 20 years. He had planned to retire from there. Now he was considering leaving because of how Richard had treated his daughter. She did not want to be the reason her father had to start over somewhere new at his age. The next day at school, Sarah could not concentrate. She sat through her classes, barely hearing the teachers, her mind circling the same thoughts over and over. It was not fair. She had done everything right. She had worked hard, learned everything she could, proven herself capable. And still, it was not enough. During lunch, her best friend Maya asked what was wrong. Sarah explained everything, the challenge, the impossible repair, Richard's new policy. Maya listened carefully, then asked a question that stopped Sarah cold. Why was she letting Richard define what she could do? If he would not let her work at his shop, why not work somewhere else? Why not start her own business? Sarah laughed at first. She was 16. She could not start a business. She did not have money or equipment or a location. But Mia was serious. She pointed out that Sarah did not need a fancy shop. She could work out of her driveway. She could start small, maybe doing repairs for neighbors and friends, building a reputation one car at a time. She could use social media to advertise for free. She had nothing to lose by trying. The idea took root in Sarah's mind and would not let go. All through her afternoon classes, she thought about it. By the time school ended, she had made a decision. She was going to do it. She was going to start her own mobile mechanic service. If Richard did not want her at his shop, she would prove she did not need his shop. When she got home, she found Marcus in the garage, organizing his personal tools. She told him her plan. He looked at her for a long moment, then slowly smiled. He said she could use his tools. He would help her with the jobs she could not handle alone. He would teach her about running a business, how to price her services, how to deal with difficult customers, how to keep proper records. That weekend, Sarah created social media accounts for her new business. She called it Sarah's Mobile Mechanics. She posted before and after photos of cars she had worked on with her father, explained her services, and listed her prices significantly lower than most shops charged. She emphasized that she would come to the customer's location, saving them the hassle of towing or driving a broken car. Within 2 days, she had her first customer. A woman from 3 streets over had seen the post and needed her oil changed. Sarah went to the woman's house, changed the oil in her driveway, and charged $40 instead of the $70 that most shops asked. The woman was thrilled. She told her friends that by the end of the first week, Sarah had completed 5 jobs. By the end of the month, she had more requests than she could handle around her school schedule. People liked that she came to them. They liked her prices. They liked that she explained what she was doing in terms they could understand. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. Richard heard about it, of course. Riverside was not a large town. Several of Sarah's customers had been regular clients at his shop. He was losing business to a 16-year-old girl working out of her driveway. It made him furious. He started calling around to other shop owners, suggesting they warn customers about unlicensed mechanics, implying that Sarah's work was dangerous and unprofessional, but his campaign backfired. The shop owners thought Richard sounded petty and desperate. Some of them remembered Marcus from industry events and reached out to him directly, offering support and advice for Sarah's business. A few even sent customers her way when they were too busy to take on new work. The automotive community was smaller than Richard realized, and reputation mattered more than he understood. 3 months after starting her business, Sarah had saved nearly $3,000. She had learned to manage her time between school and work. She had dealt with difficult customers and complicated repairs. She had proven to herself and to everyone watching that she could succeed on her own terms. Then one afternoon, she received a call from an unknown number. A man's voice asked if she was Sarah Marcus's daughter. When she confirmed, he introduced himself as James Mitchell, the owner of Mitchell Automotive, the largest independent repair chain in the state. He said he had heard about her from several sources. He had heard about the vintage car repair. He had heard about her mobile business. He wanted to meet her. Sarah's hands shook as she wrote down the address. Mitchell Automotive was legendary. They had 10 locations, employed over 100 mechanics, and handled everything from basic maintenance to complete engine rebuilds. James Mitchell himself was known for his commitment to excellence and his willingness to give opportunities to talented people regardless of their background. The meeting was scheduled for Saturday morning at the main location. Sarah barely slept the night before. She arrived 15 minutes early, wearing clean jeans and her best shirt, her hair pulled back neatly. The shop was enormous, easily 5 times the size of Riverside Auto. There were dozens of bays, state-of-the-art equipment, and mechanics working on everything from economy cars to luxury vehicles. James Mitchell was not what she expected. He was in his 60s, with gray hair and grease under his fingernails, despite wearing a button-down shirt and khakis. He shook her hand firmly and invited her to walk through the shop with him. As they walked, he asked her questions. Not questions designed to test her knowledge, but genuine questions about how she approached problems. What interested her about automotive work, what her goals were, Sarah answered honestly. She talked about growing up in her father's shop, about learning to listen to engines, about the satisfaction of solving